Lovely. So today, just a little bit about mobility through the whole body, but hopefully just feeling a little bit more mobile and stretched by the end. So we're going to stretch it to the ceiling, but thinking about leading with the little fingers, so we're circling the wrists. So any flamenco enthusiasts might think about that, picking an apple from the tree. So let's just get that action of little finger, ring finger, middle finger, index finger, making a fist, and then starting again. So we'll do that overhead, so we're getting the full body stretch, but then the action of picking an apple from the tree, side to side. Let's start to deepen the breath. Maybe we can start to get that kind of bow and arrow action, one elbow down, stretch up. So another round each side, but then let's change the emphasis. So that was an outward movement. Now let's think inwards, still leading with the little finger inwards and round. So internal rotation of the wrist, and take that side to side, rounding in. Lovely. See if you can feel the outline of the feet so that we're active through the legs, and we've got that action of pressing down in order to rise up through the body. And then let's shrug out those wrists and the shoulders, and we'll again do the same sort of moving through a gentle range of movement, but with the shoulders. So shoulders come forwards and back. Just working through that horizontal plane coming forwards, shoulders separate, and then squeezing the shoulder blades together, chest comes forwards. If you've got any niggles in your lower back, just be mindful of not overextending here. A slight tuck in the tailbone will just give you a little bit of support for the lower back. So we can be quite vigorous in this movement forwards and back. It's nice to get a little bit of heat into those muscles. So the muscles pump up a little bit with a rich blood supply, which obviously always helps with mobility. Still in there, focus with the shoulders. Keep the shoulders back and lifting up to the ears, and then active right toes to the fingertips. So the whole chain of muscles of the arms working, fingers to the floor. Long neck. So finding that up and down movement where we're getting a stretch right down to the fingertips from the neck. Let's try and work in this up and down action, the vertical movement with the shoulders slightly back and a slight external rotation of the shoulders. So it can sometimes help having the palms facing forwards, or even turning so that the little fingers come a little bit further forwards, just so we keep that nice openness across the chest. A few more times, and do feel the shoulder blades gliding up and down. And then we'll shrug out the shoulders. We're moving on to the ribs, so thinking about the movement around the waist. Let's get a wider base for balance, feet a little bit wider. Let's hold the ribs, slightly soften the knees, no knocking out the knees. And with a hand on the right hip, left hand on the left ribs, gently take your ribs over to the right. Till we feel that stretch, working across the body, and then the other side. So we're not over-forcing, but just sometimes pressing just gives the brain a little bit more chance to catch up. What movement are we trying to make? So where we often through life gradually lose some distance between the ribs and the hips, we're just trying to eke out a little bit more space, side to side. So as if the ribs were sitting on a table and gliding side to side. If you feel you've got the action, we can stack the hands and just take that movement side to side. We want to go to the side far enough that we may even feel sensations in that opposite hip. We're trying to stabilize so the lower body is staying in place. Shoulders back and down, so we have that externally rotating position in the shoulders. So the chest is nicely open. We're having that nice stacked alignment, chins into the neck. Ears in line with the shoulders, gliding side to side. Forwards and backwards. So here it's probably helpful to have one hand in the front and the back, and we cave in for the ribs to go back, and then push into the hand as the ribs come forward. So that forward and back movement with the ribs. So hold wherever it makes sense to you, but try and stabilize through the hips and get that movement forwards and backwards. Sometimes pulling against the hip crest here to take the ribs forwards, but with this tightness in those abdominal muscles, forwards and backwards. Isn't it funny, these quite small movements, because we're going to be pretty much to our end range movement in each time, in each case, we start to generate quite a bit of heat in the body. Now you can either keep in this forward and backward movement, or can we try and go through those 4 points? So ribs over to the right, ribs come forward, over to the left, and then over to the back. So we're trying to stabilize the lower body, and we're just working on the muscles all around the waist. We're aiming to keep the shoulders down away from the ears. You can even tell from the strain in my voice, the effort involved in getting that circling. So if the ribs were drawing a circle on the floor, that can sometimes give you a nice visual to think about what's happening here or what we're aiming for. And let's take the ribs in the other direction. And if this feels completely alien and you just feel awkward, sometimes it's quite hard to feel our way into actions that we're just not accustomed to taking. You can take that side to side, forward and backward action. Because on our last couple of rounds, and then we'll move on to the hips. All right, so once you feel a little bit more limber around the waist, let's go on to the hips. The feet are nice and wide. Let's take the hips all the way over to the right, get that yummy inner thigh stretch. So this right hip hikes up, and we press down through the left leg. And then to the other side, no forcing, particularly as this is probably the first inner thigh stretch you're taking of the day. And I quite like to press down on the top of the thigh, just from the crease at the top of the leg. So if I get a stretch along the back as well. Nice deep breaths in and out of the nose. And then we're going to try to do those circles. So this time, so the ribs would move down to the pelvis, doing a big circle. Now be really mindful as the hips go back, making possibly the first hamstring stretch of the day to be nice and nurturing. As the hips come forwards, let's get that pelvic tilt. So the idea of the pelvis being a bowl of water. Here as the hips come forward, water tipping out the back. So we lengthen through the tailbone. It can be quite helpful to think about the pelvis and the numbers around the clock. So tipping water out the back, out the side, out the front, out the other side, so that you're really involving the position of the pelvis to get work into the waist and into the legs. And let's take it in the other direction. Holding wherever you feel you want a little bit of support. And even with the fingers wrapped around the waist, you can kind of exaggerate the tilt of the pelvis here. I'm helping to tip the pelvis forwards, and that takes the stretch right into the top of the hamstrings. All right, because that was a lot of work into that, let's take a standing cat-cow before we move on to the knees. So knees come bent, hold on to the knees and pull your chest forward and stick the bottom out. So see how the sit bones are riding up the wall behind. Chest open wide, stretching the front of the body. And then the reverse. We can pull on the backs of the knees to get that flexion. And you may want to pause here to get a really nice release in the lower back. Let's take another cow pose. Chest forward, shoulders back. Deep breath in. And then reverse. Chin to chest. Empty the lung. Okay, onto the knees. So feet at least hip distance apart. Let's hold the knees and take a gentle sway over to the right, forward to the left, and straighten up. Over to the right, forward, left, and straighten up. We're giving as much support as we need to the knees here, because obviously we're working on muscles, tendons, ligaments that's stabilizing the knees. Making the knees stacked under the hips, over the ankles. So just giving that a little bit of extra support. We're trying to keep the feet flat to the floor, so we're also working the stabilizers of the ankle. Let's take those circles in the other direction. Mindful, slow, controlled circles. So extra nurturing for the knees. And And then let's move on to the ankles, and then let's get moving. Weight into the left foot. Let's lift the right foot and take a big circle. See if you can find space between the toes. And as you look at the toes, if you find that there are any toes that are kind of glued together, that might be an indication it'd be worth going, keep going, by the way, that you could work on that toe separating with the fingers between each toes, just to start to work a bit of a gap space in between the toes. Have a shake out of that leg, over to the other side, the ankle. We can hold the wall, the chair, if that helps. Just exploring the ankle joint. So if it feels like it's clunking over and the tendons aren't gliding over joints, maybe make the circle a little bit smaller, but have a check-in with the toes on this foot. Go the other direction. See if we can spread and see daylight between each of the toes. And let's get a shake out. All right, so thinking about movement for the whole body, I'm going to use the near side leg. So if we all face over to your left, the near side leg, your right leg is going to be our pivoting point. So that's not going to move that foot from the floor. With your far side leg, step forwards and bend the knee. Our pivoting leg, the foot stays in the same place. We return and then we step back. And again, bending that back knee so we can straighten our pivoting leg. Does that make sense? So we're stepping forwards into a lunge, and then we step back into a hamstring stretch. Now, if you first of all have a go at taking this forward and backward movement so that we find we have our balance, you probably want to look at something that's not moving. We can gradually, over time, add a little bit of a pelvic tilt and the arms rise up. Spine extension, and then the arms drop by the side of the body behind this hamstring stretch. The toes lift up into a curling forward action, so we are flexing the spine. So, whole body, the stabilizers our balance. Stretching the front of the body, including the front hip flexors here, into flexion, rounding the spine with a hamstring stretch. So if you find the large movements of the arms, just send your balance off altogether. We'll have the hands on the hips. So our focus here, we're obviously mobilizing the hips, working on our core stability, hip flexor stretch here. Working on the strength of the ankle, because it's the same ankle which is staying on the floor that we're loading weight onto. Let's have two more on this side. A big stretch, really reach into the fingertips. You can reach the arms up and behind you, so you can get a little bit of a tricep stretch. So on our last one for this side, you control how much of a back bend and also how much support you give to the lower back with that pelvic tilt. And then let's shake out that leg we've been standing on, give it a good old shake. The other side. So plant, think of your left foot, that's not going to move. So the leg that moves is the one that bends, steps back, bends. That allows us to lift the toes and get the hamstring stretch of our static leg. I shouldn't say static, it's moving. So just find your way into this forward and backward stepping movement. And we start slowly because obviously we're stretching the other hip flexors in this point. We maybe reach the arms overhead. We'll go at a pace that you can control the movement. But then be patient if you are wobbling, because it's not a repetitive movement we tend to take, but really important to move through these points mindfully. If we're going to be fussy about the feet, if you've got lines on your floor, if we try and always keep this moving leg in line with the hip, the knees tracking over the toes. So that we're working on really nice alignment for the hips. for the last two, if you find that you need to work more on a release for the lower spine, maybe pause in this rounding position. Maybe give a squeeze to the back of the leg. So, you know, we can adapt, modify the sequence so that you're focusing on what's going to be more helpful specifically to you. Just keep us tight in the hamstrings. This will feel really tight. On our last one. And then we'll shake out the leg that we've been pivoting on. So you get a shake, just having loaded onto that ankle. Brilliant. Okay, still a little bit with the hips. Let's have the weight into the other leg. First, we'll go back to the first leg you were pivoting on. So with the left leg, let's draw a figure 8 on the floor. So this is internal rotation of the hip. Then trace that circle forwards and then diagonally back. So think about the figure 8 on the floor, internal and external rotation. So because I want you to feel a nice fluidity and mobility in the hip, you can hold the wall if you want a little bit of stability. Wonderful. See if we can get nice and open across the chest. Head directly over the ribs. Particularly, we'll sometimes want to look at the floor and we lose that lovely posture in the upper body. Great. And the other side, again, before we do that, just shake out if that felt quite a load on the standing ankle. And just when you're ready, only let's take that figure of 8 on the other side. Internal rotation. So briefly getting a stretch on the outer hip. And then external rotation in the thigh stretching. So working through the abductors, adductors of the hip, but hopefully with a gliding movement. Couple more times. And lengthen up through the crown of the head. Doing well. Nearly time for the floor. Okay, have a shake out of the legs. Take a moment just to kick back. Last standing sequence. We're going to take the arms overhead, reach up, and then folding. Hamstrings get a nice stretch here. Fold all the way, bend the knees as much as they need to. Chair pose, look at your toes. Have your knees tracking over the toes, but where you can still see your toes, and lift the arms. Now slight tilt in the pelvis, drawing the ribs together, navel to spine, find a really strong position here where you can lift the toes. And again, here's a good chance to have a look. Can I separate the toes wide enough to see daylight? And it's the intention anyway, which is really important here to stretch those muscles around the toes. We spend so much time with the feet scrunched up in shoes. Now press down through the outline of the feet, stand up, and release the arms down. Off we go again. Deep breath in, stretching, reaching up to the ceiling, breathing out, shoulders back and down, come to your forward fold, bow the head to the back. Sit bones up the wall behind, a nice, gentle, no forcing stretch of the backs of the legs. Checking with the toes, sit back in the heels, bend the knees and sit low like you're going to sit in a chair. Feel length in the spine, so fingers reaching forwards, hips reaching back. Front ribs come together, navel to spine. Wiggle the toes. Keep the knees tracking forwards, ankles, knees, hips all in a lovely line. And then standing all the way up. Release the arms down. You're going to do one more while I adjust the camera down, and then we'll be on all fours. So take a deep breath in, arms overhead. Stretch to the ceiling, and as you breathe out, come to your forward fold, briefly getting that hamstring stretch. Look at your toes, bend the knees, sit low. Coming up into your chair, lengthening the spine. And then your choice, from your chair, you can either come all the way to the floor or complete that, take a roll down through the spine. When you're ready, join me on all fours. One round of cat-cow, hopefully the shoulder spine are nice and warmed up. Toes pointing away, a nice box position here. Turn those jaw lids. See how that switches on, the tone in the arms, eyes and the elbows point forward, chest open wide, and let's breathe in, like you're pulling your chest through, so chest forward, shoulders back, sit bones riding up the wall behind, and the reverse. Chin to chest, press away from the floor, lift the ribs, tilt the pelvis, bottom touch, stretch the back of the body. Last time, breathing in, up, and breathing out, empty the lungs. We're stepping the right foot forwards. We line up the back foot with the knee and the hip. And you may need to adjust the foot forwards a little bit. We're going to support the back and the belly and slowly hinge forwards. We're getting a hip flexor stretch here, but trying to control how deeply we go. Now, if you've got blocks, this is a good time to bring the floor up to you. You can place your hands on blocks, or maybe fingertips come to the floor. We're here for 3 rounds of breath, and let's think about Shivananda breath. You're going right to the ends of the breath. So breathe in and hold the breath for a couple of seconds, like you're siphoning up air right to the crown of the head. And pause, and then when you breathe out, we're fully breathing out, right to the ends of the lips come together, navel to spine, we're hollowing out the abs, squeeze, Mula Bandha, the powerhouse, the core pulled in tightly at the end of that exhalation. 2 more, so nice deep breath in, fill the lungs. So I'm getting you to focus on the breath. So we're not overstraining, always back off if you need to. If it's too much on your wrist, create fists here. If you need any padding for the knee that we're resting on, that left knee, we can roll up the mat a couple of times, just to give a bit of padding. Shouldn't be any discomfort there. So that idea of siphoning the air in, pausing, and then plunging the air out so we can tighten the core, so zip everything in. We'll have 1 more breath here. Right to the end, left, and then you switch legs. Before we do that, just allow the hips to sway side to side. So we're not quite holding that knee lunge, hip flexor stretch for 90 seconds. That will be our minimum for yin stretch. But it's long enough that we can start to influence slightly more than on the other leg, by the way now. Set your left foot forwards. Support yourself, tilt the pelvis, and find where's a good hip flexor stretch on this side. By pausing and getting a really deep breath, go right to the ends of the breath, a full inhalation, fully emptying the lungs. We are giving the body time to switch to what you could call the yin breath. All those dynamic moves we were taking, focusing on muscular strength repetition. By quieting the mind here and focusing, maybe lengthening that out breath, we're going into the yin side, that more introverted side of yoga practice, where we start to influence the other connective tissues, so the ligaments, tendons. And we need to be really gentle with those because obviously muscles are elastic. The other connective tissues are plastic, so they benefit from a light tension, but go too far, then they can't return to their original state. So it's a light, very mild discomfort, you could see it as. And then let's slowly take the knee back, and again, nice little sway. You can circle the hips. So yesterday we were doing the restless cobra. You can see this is a restless all fours position, just feeling a way around and take those circles in the other direction. And then we're moving on to our side. So when you're ready, if you can lie on your left hand side, we're kind of near to the end, you can hold your head, think Cleopatra, tilt the pelvis, or in the longest line, and line up at the front edge of the mat. Squeeze your glutes, lift the top leg so it's hip height, side kick, Pilates side kick. Everything from the hips up, no movement. We'll glide the leg forwards, Feel that in the glutes at the back, and then take the leg back a little bit behind the body without bending the knee. That's cheating. Sometimes it's just more a feeling of lengthening the leg, taking behind the body. But just notice or anticipate that the upper body will want to be your counterweight. So instead, if we think about the body coming to meet the leg as it comes forwards, and coming to meet the leg at the back, we can switch on the muscles which will prevent this oppositional movement in the body where we naturally want to create a counterbalance. We can take this a little bit more vigorously as we get that stability in the body. Try to think about going to the end of the breath, because that's where we can get an extra strong pulling in the core muscles, which will help that stability. Give me 2 more of these pendulum swings, but with control, where you could pause at any moment and then rest the knee down. Give the hip a little bit of a rub. Great. Inner thigh, lower toes curled up towards me, knee and toes pointing forwards. And we're going to lift for 10. You can press down the inner thigh for more resistance. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Before we go on to the other side, you might want to take a full body stretch, have a little rock from one sit bone to the other, massaging out the glutes, and then let's spin around and do the same sequence on the other side. So again, lining yourself up at the front edge of your mat. If you're on the one, start to find that pelvic tilt. So these abs, no popping out here. Top leg, hip height, and let's find our way into that forward and backward movement and see if it's more difficult on this side, particularly going behind the body, really difficult. There's very little in our day-to-day activity that requires that hip extension. So it's very tempting to bend the knee just to get a little bit more movement. So let's anticipate that and really point the toes. So think about lengthening the leg and maybe reaching diagonally behind you. And make sure you are breathing. Those phases of the movement which are particularly difficult, very tempting just to grit your teeth. So let's focus the muscular effort where it's actually going to help the body, help the movement, stabilize the upper body. So aiming to keep the leg the same distance from the floor, quite hard without a mirror, so maybe glancing back. And then back to that awareness of avoiding using the upper body as a counterweight. So particularly as the leg comes forwards, we can think about contracting these core muscles and almost like a drawbridge, that's reeling the leg forwards. And then slowly with control, so you're working against some resistance as you then take the leg behind the body, really reaching into those toes. Last time. And then we can bend the knee and pat out the hip. All right, let's get your thumb right into those hip flexors, and let's move to the inner thigh. So your lower leg, flatten the foot, so toes pointing forwards, knee pointing forwards, add on a little bit of resistance. We've just got 10, rising up, press into the fingers. The heel is leading, reaching for the side wall. 9, long leg, try to avoid the bend here. 7, 6, no clenching of the jaw, nice soft through the shoulders. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when you're ready, onto your back, hook the knees into the chest. And unless anyone unmutes themselves and tells me otherwise, we've got time to do the 100. So let's take the arms out wide and just give a massage across the glutes for a moment. A circle in each direction. And then your 100 position, we're either in this position, so we're curling head, neck and shoulders up, knees over the hips, or we straighten the legs and we're vigorously patting. So if we reach into the fingertips, remember the whole chain, fingertips all around the shoulders to the other fingertips are engaged. So we're strengthening the back of the body. At the same time, we're trying to lift the hips and lift the shoulders all the way onto the core. So find whether you want the legs straight or bent, and where there's no arching at the back, and we reach into the fingers. I'm going to count. We pat down 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it will be palms up 2, 3, 4, 5. Are we ready? 100. Shoulders down away from the ears. Plug all of your effort into the navel, pressing into the floor. And let's breathe in, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 50. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, last. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hug the knees down to the chest. Have a little sway of the knees side to side. Open the arms in a wide T, and let the knees fall over to one side. We're pausing here. You can use the opposite hand to guide the hips a little bit further over, but let's try to relax into the shoulders, shake out the head with the back of the head resting, rolling on the floor. Breathe deeply and just take a moment to soften down. Now here, sometimes we can just feel an awkwardness in the feet because they're slipping. We can cross the top knee over the left if that just gives you a little bit more stability, hooking it in place and giving you that chance to relax into the spinal twist. Breathe. And then we'll take those knees over to the other side. So knees up to the ceiling, up and over to the other side. Arms open wide, and then again here you may want to just find where's a comfortable place for the head. We're often told to look in the opposite direction of the knees, but I actually prefer to look towards the knees and get a gentle neck stretch down into the upper arm of that arm behind. Again, we can cross one knee over the other, and a twisted knot position for the knees, and breathe. No forcing this wide stretch. We're trying to get both shoulder blades to the floor, both shoulders down, or at least feeling supported so you can relax into it. Nice deep breath in and out of the nose. Take a moment to feel some quiet and stillness in the body and the mind. And try and capture that moment, hold on to it for the rest of the day. So on when you're ready, we can slowly take the knees center. You have a rock on the spine or a full body stretch. Big fan of just being led by what you actually feel you need. So on when you're ready, you come up to sitting and